Good evening and welcome to the Yukon Planning Commission special study session this evening. Today is August 12th, 2024. And do we do invocation? Just keep on going. Okay.
So do you what?
It's fine. So item number 1, discuss R2 medium density zoning district presented by the planning staff. You guys, let's go.
Do we need a roll call? Do we need a roll call? I don't, I'm just asking.
But and to be fair, this is my first study session, so if you'll help us kind of stumble through this and get through it. So
Yep.
Call the roll, please.
Chairman Wright,
Here.
Vice Chairman Geis,
Here.
Commissioner Clark,
Here.
Commissioner Jones,
Here.
Commissioner Knuckles.
Here.
Please proceed.
So we thought we would kind of walk you through a little bit of the history of the R2 zoning, kind of where we were and what is currently in ordinance. So tonight, before you at your seats, you have a copy of 3 different tables, and it kind of walks you through what the lot size requirements are for the R2 zoning. Previously, before the Unified Development Code was adopted, you had to have a minimum lot area of 10,000 square feet with a minimum lot width of 80 feet. And then your max coverage was 35%. That's some of the bigger changes, as well as the rear setback that has changed from the Unified Development Code. The Unified Development Code also had a change in definition where previously, prior to the Unified Development Code, it only had where 1 and 2 family dwellings were allowed. It did not allow for the triplexes, quadplexes, etc., that the current R2 does allow. So just so you kind of understand the differences of what has already happened with the adoption of the Unified Development Code a year ago. The where we're heading is just to kind of see, with the recent discussion that we had of the overlay at the last meeting, kind of where you guys would like to go regarding the R2 district, is with the density, with the lot size thing, requirements, if those need to be changed at all. It's kind of where we're at. Additionally, one other change that was in the Unified Development Code with the R2 is it had some design requirements, and you had received those in your packet of what those design requirements are. Those design requirements are only required for the R2 district as well as the overlay district. And those are 2 separate things. So
because we have R2 in other parts of the city, R2 has its own set of design
guidelines.
But then there's additional guidelines in the overlay district.
Correct.
Can you explain some of the additional guidelines in the overlay district over the R2?
Sure. So it also has the garages have to be set back 15 feet, as well as the requirement of porches. In the R2 and the overlay, you also have, let me get over there.
And this is current, right?
Yes, this is current, correct. You also have the requirement of, or the allowance to have the higher density. We'll get there
Lots
eventually
of
in the design.
paperwork.
Yes, there is lots. We're just trying to make sure you guys had everything that you could possibly need. I'm fairly certain, just looking at it, and for like the larger 2 and 4 families, so the triplex, duplex, and things that has some parking requirements, that might be a little bit different than the R2.
So the difference with the overlay is just that the design requirements are if you build single family in the overlay. The design requirements, as I understand them, are exactly the same for R2 inside and outside. If you're doing a duplex, or you can do a triplex or a quadplex, and that can be on anything zoned R2. If you have enough space to do that, you have to have enough space to build whatever you're building. But if you're building a single family home inside the overlay, those design requirements are on the single family home as well. But you can't apply them anywhere else
Why?
for a single family because it's a state law that
what
says
I
you
thought.
cannot have design requirements on a single family home unless it's in an overlay. And there's a couple of other caveats in that state law, but it doesn't apply to what we've tried to do here.
Why would we not apply the same overlay district like standards and guidelines to the duplex, the triplex, and the quadplex? Does that make sense? Am I understanding
No,
you
that-
right? Like the single family units have their own set of design or guidelines for their design, right? But the other three don't?
No, for the R2 and the overlay district, regardless of zoning,
They
you have
match.
to have the design guidelines and in the R2 district. Does that make
So
sense?
both are the same in and outside the overlay.
For R2, correct.
In and
For
outside.
single,
Yes.
yeah.
So the overlay is strictly for single family homes to elevate it. Is that right?
It's allowing single-family homes to have some design guidelines to go with them, as well as the commercial entities, things like that, anything that's within that overlay district.
So additional guidelines inside the overlay,
Correct.
and those additional guidelines are,
The same as the R2.
yeah.
Or better.
So just to recap, it's on all there's design guidelines on all R2 all over the city, inside and outside the overlay. But if for a single family residential, can only have design guidelines inside the overlay.
That's the state law. We can't put
Yes.
single family guidelines on outside of an overlay. For example,
Right.
like this looks like R2 is Parkland, for example, my neighborhood. We can't put guidelines on single family homes there because of the state law. Am I understanding that right?
Unless there's an overlay.
Unless, well, but it's not because it's
Right.
right. So it's completely away from it. Okay.
But you could put an overlay somewhere else. Like
Sure.
this doesn't have to be the only overlay in
Right.
Yukon, but
Naturally.
right now it is.
But for clarification, if a developer came in with a PUD, they could put design guidelines in that PUD. It just wouldn't be a regulation of the city.
Correct.
Correct.
Okay. Gentlemen, do you guys have any other questions? Like my biggest, I guess question was, what's the difference in just normal R2 and the overlay? Because the question that's been asked by the citizens is like, just do away with all of that. Well, I understand that R2, and correct me if I'm wrong, I'm a commercial guy, so when it
Right.
comes to this residential stuff, that's tough for me to understand. So, but R2's purpose is to build a little bit of density in an area because they're allowing that, right? Where it was to support the commercial or to support that area, if you will.
Correct.
I mean, that's
Yes.
the intention of the overlay.
Correct.
And then we're able to do some things where we ask for design elements or, but to your point, the guidelines that will help us reach a look that the city's looking for
Correct.
in that
Yes.
area.
The overlay, if we did away with the overlay, let's just say that the R2 would still be required to meet those design guidelines since that is already in code. But the R1 would not. The difference if with that overlay being such a small area, the other thing that was brought up was about lot sizes. And we looked at the average lot size just within that overlay district in R2, and the average is 9,500 square feet. So the past code, those lots would not meet the current
You wouldn't be able to do
requirements.
anything down there.
Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
So what we're trying to kind of test the waters on, if you will, is try to see where do we want to go with the R2 district? What do we want to do with, do we want to keep the design guidelines? Do we want, and we feel that we feel based on information that was in the comprehensive plan that happened during the information during the code rewrite initially a year ago, a little over a year ago now, but that the citizens do want want that. They do want those design guidelines to be in place.
And back to your point, these guidelines are to help preserve that area for a certain look, correct?
Correct.
And one of them being where the porch lies,
Correct.
right? Not on the side of the house, in front of the house.
Correct. Yes.
Can I interrupt real quick? It's to kind of also to prevent this look
Correct.
because
Now that's not throughout the rest of the city. That's just within the overlay.
no,
district.
it's throughout the whole city.
Yeah, I'm betting that that look is some of the previous permits that were pulled of the list that you did. That's over there north of the neighborhood market.
Yeah.
Is that also similar to how they built the Ashton Place north of? Yes.
Yeah, and I think both of those were PUDs.
That they were.
Yeah.
Yeah, those were PUDs. So there could be additional requirements on the design aspects of those.
Well, and again, I mean, I think the point of a PUD is to
Built it.
come to the table with the developer and let's work together.
Yeah.
Right. Very smart assistant city manager told me that one time. Like, that's where we could go and negotiate. Like, we can, like, you give us what you want, we'll give you what we want. Like, let's meet in the middle of it. And I love that. You know, I think that encourages people moving into town.
Now, correct me if I'm wrong, and I live in a house full of women, so that happens frequently. But most of the, I won't say conflict, but the problems that people had with it was the triplexes and quadplexes, or fourplexes, whatever they call it. Is that what you
That's-
guys have seen?
That's
Must
yeah,
have been
that's kind of what we've heard from a few people is that they had some trouble with the density being the triplexes and quadplexes. They'd still have to meet all the design
Right.
and all the lot size requirements. So that kind of narrows down the area where they're able to go just because of lot size requirements and setbacks and all that. That kind of narrows that down.
And I know,
Especially if council passes that
right.
ordinance that you, yeah.
Now I know that part of the reason we did this was because of studies that were done, and they were trying to think of the overlay. Some other towns have done similar things with their downtown area ish, where they increase for a younger, I won't say audience, but citizens
Yep.
to come in and starter homes, starter get intos, all this stuff, and have that to make it more of a thriving downtown issue, I think is what it was. Is there any, do we know what that would look like if we took away the quads or the tries? Would that defeat our purpose majorly? Have you guys seen a lot of the permits for?
Honestly, a lot of the
Triplex.
permits we've had is more of a duplex that I've seen since I've been here is more duplex related or single family related. I haven't seen, I think there's only a couple quadplexes. The one that is over south of downtown or north of downtown, I'm sorry.
That one's two duplexes, but that's on a 14,000 square foot lot.
Yeah,
So,
that's kind of an oddity.
in the comp plan, there was they wanted urban intensity around this area. So the two things that they proposed were to allow that 3,500 square foot lot, which we never had any applications for that in the year. We've only been working with this code for a year. We haven't had any applications for that during that time. And then the other thing was to change the R2 from duplex to medium density, which allowed up to 4, which, you could get some cool things like townhomes, row homes. You could get, there's all kinds of cool housing out there. We just haven't had any applications for anything like that yet. The closest thing was the Salazar, but it's not in the urban core. It's outside the urban core.
What are you speaking to, the Salazar?
The Salazar duplexes, and you've got a picture of those in your packet.
Where were those located?
They're just outside the urban core. Just one street over.
It's one, Salazar.
It is zoned as
This one
R2
right here,
though.
guys. Yeah.
That was brought up at the last, planning commission meeting, and, but it's a huge lot. It was a church, and they bought it. And so they put two duplexes on it, which meets the new code.
And these are gorgeous. I think we have to be careful too to hinder progress. I mean, it sure would be nice to encourage properties like this in what we do decide, because like if we want our downtown to grow, I mean, I just think we need people to live down there.
Well, that was the intent with the urban core overlay, was to allow some increase of density down there, because we're also running out of land to develop that's, outside the floodplain. And, a lot of our big residential pieces that could be developed are, we don't have that much left. So we have to, if we do want to continue to grow our population, or our housing, or a variety of housing types, even for our existing population, we have to find ways to diversify that. And density is the way that developers are doing it now, because they can make money by having smaller lots.
Well, and I think we can agree, I won't speak for the rest of you guys, but there's plenty of lots in this area that could be invested into and improved, if you will. I drove every street in this district over the weekend, and there's plenty of opportunity for improvements, I think, so.
And we know there's some.
The
sorry, go ahead.
proposed that we're doing a study on is to limit those triplexes, though, right?
Yes, that's one of the question is, do we want to do any changes to the additional of having of allowing the triplexes and quadplexes, or do we want to keep it the way it is? Do we want to do anything with the lot size requirements in R2? That's kind of what the proposal that we're trying to figure out where
So
to head.
based off the initial proposal that was brought to us that we're doing the study on, if we do nothing today, we have the potential of quadplexes and
Correct.
big.
Yes.
So if we want to preserve this area and bring it back, or bring it to where we're proposed to, that brings it back down to at max a duplex. Is that correct?
Yes, if you wanted to kind of keep
Based
it
off of
the
lots.
way it has been, yes, yes.
Remind me again, what was the biggest problem that was brought up with the triplex and the quads?
Honestly, I think it was just about the density of them and having them so close to other single family residences, and that's kind of what I gleaned from that
Okay.
interaction.
So just to recap, in my mind here, from the old plan that was prior to current to our proposal, what are the differences of highlightable action items?
The differences is primarily going to be lot size, lot coverage, as well as the allowable for the density side of it. So the triplexes, quadplexes. That's really the,
From
kind of
from
the
the
changes.
old,
yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So would that be the definition of R2?
Yeah, that
Would-
would include our definition, yes.
Would
that's the
my,
definition of R2 outside of.
the definition of R2 right now is medium density residential. And then when you go into the definition, it talks about what all's allowed in there.
Medium densities up to 4 multifamilies, but once you go above 4, now you're into
R3.
R3 multifamily. That's when yeah.
Right.
So, are we really being asked to change the code? You know what I mean? Like the R2 code?
We could change some of the definitions in it.
Let me ask you this: how does this compare to other R2s? Oklahoma City, Edmond, Mustang. I mean, I'm not familiar with R2 in other municipalities.
Jessica, do
is
you
it
want to
medium
take that
density?
question?
Yes, I can help answer that one. So as far as Oklahoma City goes, you do have an R1, which is single family, of R2, which is typically 2 family, and then you have R3, R4, and then they even have additional residential districts for like manufactured homes. So in Oklahoma City, you have you have additional districts, so that allows them to be able to spread it out. So in Yukon right here, we just have the R1, the R2, and the R3. So the intent for us to include the triplexes and the fourplexes was just because since you only have 3, it's limited to what you can include in it. And so once you get up to R3, then you have large multifamily complexes such as garden style apartments.
Are the parameters between quadplex, triplex, and duplex any different? Or guidelines, I guess I should have asked.
As far as the requirements of the lot that they have to fit on,
the like lot size, for
Mm-mm.
example. I mean, if you want to put a duplex on a 10,000 square foot lot, that's different than putting a quadplex on a 10,000 square foot lot. So is there any room there to set some guidelines on, like, you need it? And again, I think we would want staff to recommend this, you know, what would be appropriate for a quadplex.
Well, it's in there. It talks about
Yeah.
parking.
Yep.
Like
I saw the parking,
I
yeah.
don't see how you could get if you've got a quadplex
Mhm.
and you need to have parking in behind the building,
Right.
so you got to at least have 4 cars back there.
It's
Or
built
8.
in. I mean,
Like-
it's built in. You have to have enough square
Yeah.
footage on your lot to
So-
be able to get that in there. So
Yeah.
if you have a really small lot, you can only do,
So
A
it wouldn't
duplex.
qualify. So
Right.
it wouldn't qualify. So
Right.
it would get thrown out as far as you'd never get a permit.
right.
So the initial.
So some of that kind of polices itself without any action on our end.
And
Thanks,
Jared, I don't know
Code.
that you're being asked to do anything. We just were asked to look at that urban core and the last planning commission.
'Cause
That was a little bit problematic for the 3,500 square foot lots, pretty small. If you look at trying to get 2 cars in a driveway and, that's pretty small. And then you end up with these shotgun houses and we weren't having anything brought to us that was making it really exciting to us. So that was one concern was having that as infill in this historic district. It's not on the National Register, but we do have, that is the character of Yukon. It sets the character for the history of Yukon, that area. So that was one concern. And then, but I don't know that we're being asked to. It's just that you made the recommendation to have a study session on the R2. And so,
So we already
That's what we're doing.
We already passed the verbiage change just to prevent any further, I guess like development of like bigger than a quadplex. Wasn't that the recommendation, Mitch?
the recommendation at the last
No, like the last meeting, yeah.
at the last meeting, that was getting rid of the 3,500 square foot lot, the 25 foot lot width, and the 80% lot coverage within the overlay. So that would include R1, R2, and all the zoning that's within the overlay.
Because there is some R1 in there.
Yes.
Yep. Okay.
And so that was recommended at the last meeting. So, and we're waiting on, council needs some more information before they make a decision on it.
Is there more information that we could help them with? Like, are they waiting on us to provide them
believe
with more
so, no.
information? Okay.
I don't believe they're waiting on you guys for anything. I think it's just questions of staff.
The study session was for us to dig in a little more. I think, Joe and Dick
Right.
brought some things up that we weren't prepared to talk about, and we needed to dive in a little bit more and understand the zoning a little bit more. And correct me if I'm wrong, guys, but at least that's how it was for me.
Yes.
I didn't quite understand the lot coverage and that, and then driving the area and so on. So
And I get where they're coming from.
Yeah.
For sure. But like I said, to do what is available to do on the lot sizes that are out there, I don't see it as a big issue.
And I remember when we were talking about this originally, and yeah, you're looking at so much information, it's sometimes hard to see, but there are some very specific guidelines you guys put in place I thought were very good about the design of them, where the garage not up front. These things like the Salazar ones look very nice. I mean, if you can have good homes like that people can come to, when we say a duplex, it's not like a duplex was in the past, not what we allow now.
Right.
And so they, you don't drive into a neighborhood now if you see a duplex and go, oh, a duplex, So, we did have some thought going into that when we did this, or you guys had great thoughts on it. I looked at it and went, yeah, that's great. So it's good to talk about this though, so we can get a good handle on stuff. And like you said, with the requirements on the lot size and stuff like this, I think you can sit down all day and go through and nitpick and get to where we're never going to make everybody happy. I'm not saying that, but it's good for me to get a good grip over all of it.
Well, I think to your point of having like good guidelines in place, maybe that's where we tweak it. Because, for example, I noticed it wasn't a duplex, it was a single family home, but like to get the porch further out from the garage was literally 6 inches. Like they had just a lip that went around their porch, but I mean, it's basically the garage and the porch. So I think there may be opportunity there if we really dig down into some of the specifics, but I don't know what that approach is. But I think right now, as we stand, to Jeff's point, like our guidelines are pretty solid.
Yep. And the current R2 does require it to be, is it 4 foot square for a porch in front of?
It could have been R1.
The porch is, it's a quarter of the width of it, and then it's 5 foot in depth, I believe. I don't have it memorized, but the thing about it is it wants the garage to be set back. And that says should. They could negotiate that. That's not shall be, it should be. So if they come in with a design that's really great, that, there's a little bit of room to talk about that.
Well, we see that in other neighborhoods too. We've seen that with other developers here in the Yukon, that they're like, well, I'm going to give and take a little bit, and
Right.
it seems to be fair.
But it does require a porch now for a single family home that's built in the overlay. So some of those that you drove around and saw that are newer homes, they would have to be different than they are now.
Today, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
And they'd be more
Were
of
those
a
homes
little bit more of a
overlaid?
cottage look
They are.
that would blend in with the neighborhood a little bit better. And that was the whole intent.
I don't know if it's R1 or R2
Yeah.
specifically.
Well, and that's, even based off of, and correct me if I'm wrong or not, I'm looking back at the initial proposal and then through looking at this, even if it's R1, R2, if it's still in the overlay district guidelines apply.
Correct.
And that's where the initial proposal was, not to change R2 throughout Yukon, just to change the overlay requirements.
Yes.
To
the
marry
initial.
and match the the requirements of R2 throughout the rest with additional stipulations.
Correct. Yes. Where if council passes the ordinance that we discussed last month, then anything within that overlay would have to meet the zoning requirements, whatever zoning criteria they are. So if it's R1, which is several R1s in there, they'd meet that R1 criteria for lot size. R2, they meet R2, C1, so on and so forth.
And we've talked about this earlier this week, I think it was, but we have within the overlay, right? You have an older section and a newer section, we'll call it, from the north of 66, south of 66, and north of 66 has very small lots, right? So later down the road, if we needed to address something there to match the lot size requirements, or even do another overlay within an overlay, is that what you would do?
Or you could adjust the lines of the overlay. And
Then that could be massaged as well. But really, for the most part, that's already established over there, and there's not really free lots unless someone were to buy it and tear it down to rebuild, right?
Well, and to your point, the lots are much bigger south.
Right.
Same
And
thing.
north.
You tear it down, and yeah,
And that's
they're
where
huge.
I was looking at the requirements, and that's where I was kind of hung up of, okay, what's the average lot size versus the requirements that were proposed, right? And that's what 3,500 is the overlay men, right? And the average is, what'd you say,
9,500.
9,500?
Yep, and that's per the count, or the county, looking at what the county has versus what's platted, but
Within the overlay,
yes,
right?
within the overlay.
Just to be clear.
Do you gentlemen have any other questions for staff? So what's our next steps? Because we passed it and we've had a study session, we can't vote. I understand
Right,
that, but
right.
how do we take our next step, whether we want to make changes or whether we want to push this to the city council for approval?
If there's anything that you're wanting to change at this point, then we certainly can do that. If you guys are happy with where you guys are at, then we'll just move forward. And there's nothing that,
I personally like the idea of trying to preserve the downtown area and putting certain requirements on that to have a certain look in this area, and then also protecting that we're not overpopulating with
More than 4 families, right?
correct.
Is that what you're thinking? That's
Yeah,
what
I
I'm
mean,
thinking.
at that point, it's a
Jeff.
duplex, right? Is proposed, and to have a certain look downtown that we can put that guideline on and make it visually appealing to preserve a historical area of Yukon.
So
Okay.
you're not making a recommendation to change. You want to leave the R2 as
Lee?
is.
Steven spoke. Craig?
No, I think you've got the safeguards in place, kind of speak for themselves, so I'm good with it.
Okay.
I would say that, if we wanted to change anything, we could move the quadplex into the R3 department and limit it to a triplex
Oh, in the overlay.
in the overlay, and then have the quadplex kick into the R3 if we ever wanted.
How
If,
many
like I said,
R3s are zoned?
We don't want any quadplexes. Well, we just move them over to a different zone.
Category. So that would just be rewriting the definition of the
of-
R2 medium density and
Yeah.
excluding the quadplex. So we
mean,
could
that's-
do that.
That's an option.
We
Is that a viable option if
Blues R3.
it's just a drop dead issue that we don't want a quadplex?
Do we have any quadplexes as of this time? Or
the
fourplexes, sorry.
Salazar is 2 duplexes.
right.
So it qualifies for that as that. That Salazar that's on the
Yeah.
14,000 square foot lot, it qualifies as, it's 2 duplexes, so it meets that 4 units.
But that's per square feet of the lot.
It's just because it's R2 and it was allowed, because you can have up to 4 units.
But it hit the requirements based off the lot size.
Right.
That's what I'm saying.
Correct.
Did
Right,
they-
and that's a rare one because
lot-
that was a church before, but you could join 2 normal lots
Lot-
together and
But
have
you'd
that.
still have to come back and have that rezoned, correct?
You wouldn't have to, if it was zoned R2, you wouldn't. You might have to have the lots joined, which would be a replat.
Sure.
And
So
that would have to come to
come.
us. That would
Yeah.
have to come to us.
So there are already safeguards in place, is what you're saying, to
You
have that based off the lot size.
usually, unless you had a large area, like I can think of a couple around the city that would be good to have, or you could have row homes or something, and you could have 4 that are bigger lots.
Now you asked a question just a minute ago. Are we good with R2 as it is? Is that your question throughout Yukon or just for,
Well,
The urban
either because whatever you do to the R2, like if we change the
affect
definition, it will change it for both.
okay.
Within the urban core, it's going to be somewhat controlled because the lots aren't that big. And like we just said, if they had to put a couple together, we'd
And
be bringing it to you, but
And initially the proposal that was here, or brought to us last meeting wasn't for R2 across Yukon. It was just to change stipulations for the urban district.
right.
Overlay,
Okay.
yeah.
Jeff, you got any? So what if we wanted to, what would the steps be if we take Lee's suggestion and move that down? What do we need to do?
Can I ask a question? Jessica, can you put some input in this toward because there was a reason, I'm sure, that the quadplexes were included in the R2 originally.
Yes.
Can you
So the reason it
speak
was
to that
included
again?
is because a lot of times when you have quadplexes, you have something that appears like a very large single family home. So think like Mesta Park in Oklahoma City. A lot of those large historic homes were turned into fourplexes.
Yeah.
And so I think I just want to add to caution you, if you would like to move it to the R3 district, you may have a lot of people just coming in with PUDs saying, well, I want an R2 base, but I want to build a quadplex. So I want to keep all the R2 regulations. I just want to be able to do one more unit. So
And I think that's a
that
good
is an
point,
option. And then,
too.
yeah, if someone tries to come in and rezone, well, I would like to do fourplexes, and they come in and try to rezone to R3, then you have all of the neighbors that are noticed for that and go, oh my God, R3, they're gonna build giant apartments next to me.
Right.
And so
And you open up the door to
Yes.
more than an R4. I mean,
But-
more than a
But
four.
back to your
That's
point,
correct.
even some of the larger homes south of 66 here could be a fourplex at one point in time.
they could, yes,
lots,
if
yeah.
someone wanted to renovate them.
Well, I
as
mean,
that.
yeah, even if you just left the house and renovated it
Yeah.
and turned it into a
So
farm.
Unless-
the idea that was that we had a little bit more gentle density, if you will, for this area around your downtown.
If it's an R1 though, you wouldn't be able to convert it
Sure.
into,
Well, and at the end of the day, we
Yes,
and most of our stuff.
rezoning comes to us.
yes, it's
Right.
the zoning.
With the
It's the
rezoning.
zoning. It's not, if it's in that urban core, you could, because
I
most,
mean, if it's outside of that, for all you.
yeah, you wouldn't.
Yeah.
Well, but I couldn't help but think that our citizens that, brought this up being a concern would just want us to go to R1 for all of downtown. So then we wouldn't have that problem. And I just don't believe that's the right thing for us to build density downtown.
Mm.
I mean,
Well, I
am I wrong in that?
No, I think you would go into the now where I want to rezone this block for R2, and then we open the door up just like we would on the R3 stuff. So
It's interesting.
But even at the
so I knew
with
you
the
would know
old
something about that.
That's good. Good job.
with the old R2 size, I mean it's 10,000 foot.
Yeah.
Square or for the there's nothing. I mean the basis was what 9,500. You wouldn't be able to do anything down there, even under the old. If we went all the way back to the old, so that means we wouldn't build anything, or couldn't build anything without a PUD or rezoning. Correct.
Well, I like it the way that it is too. I haven't in the last one, but I think we're good. I don't think we need to make any changes. If any of the other commissioners do, then we can definitely bring this up for a vote. Whatever you guys think. But
I'm
I think
good
these
with-
great questions, and this is what I was hopeful for.
Yeah,
I think that we all came in
Good
here to
information.
learn a little
Yeah.
bit more and make the right decisions. So, well done.
So
Good
back
job.
to your point though, where do we? So this proposal that was brought to us on last meeting, where did that? Yeah, June 8th.
Well, we passed it, so
We passed a portion of it though, right?
Right. So what was recommended for approval was, like I said, getting rid of that 3,500 square foot lot, as well as the 80% lot coverage and the 25-foot lot widths. That is going to be heard by council probably in the near future. But that's right now is the way you guys have already
So
recommended
will
on that.
you all voice out that our planning session went well and we didn't have any recommendations, or how does that work?
And
Just
we,
nothing.
I mean, back to your
Yeah,
point of
we'll
how do
bring
they
it
know
up.
that we
Well,
support.
when we have a meeting about that, we'll discuss it because they go hand in hand, the two subjects.
Sure.
You can't have a discussion about the urban core overlay without talking about the R2. So we'll bring it up. Chances are they're watching it now. So yeah.
And
It
they
is-
won't
it
be
is
able to,
televised.
they can't vote on or change anything other than what is proposed or on the agenda anyway. I mean, they can talk, they can have discussion, but they can't.
Right.
right.
But
vote
they
on
did want to have a special meeting
Right.
about that
Right.
before they
Right.
passed it.
about this.
No,
About the
about the
proposal.
urban core overlay
Yeah,
that
we
you sent.
approved. Yeah.
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 So,
Along
and
for
so
that one,
in
too.
that discussion, we'll bring this discussion up.
during
Thank
the
you.
special session.
Yeah.
Is that something that we could attend if they had questions?
Yep. It's gonna be an open meeting, most likely. We haven't heard exactly what they're wanting at this point, but as
And
soon
you'll
as
let
we
us know
know,
if we
if
need
it's
to
a
be
public
there.
meeting, you guys are always invited. And I can, if it's one that they just want with staff and we can ask about having a couple of you guys present or something. I'm
We
not
need
sure
to
if
be
it's
there, sure. But I hope, to your point, they're watching. So,
Sure they are.
hello, Councilman. And Councilwoman. Okay, do we have anything else to do?
We have a presentation from Roger.
Thank you, Dingo.
Now for the really fun stuff.
Yeah.
Law. I've just been
I
asked
read
to give
that.
you kind of a brief overview of the composition and role of the Planning Commission as it relates to the Oklahoma Open Meetings Act. So just as an overview, I'm here to remind you that you're a recommending body that's been established by the City of Yukon Code and by state statute. So you make a recommendation to City Council, but City Council is the one who actually takes action on replats and rezonings and the things that come before you. So, and some of the lot splits and things like that. We wanted to also do this because we have 3 relatively new members. Some of you, I know Jared and Jeff have been here for several years, but we wanted to make sure that all the rest of you kind of understood the role you have. Article 2, Section 201 of the Yukon Municipal Code addresses creation and role of the City of Yukon Planning Commission. It's 5 commission members nominated and confirmed, which all of you have been. The mayor or representatives of the council and the city engineer are actually ex officio members, meaning they can attend and voice their opinion, they just don't vote. I've not seen that occur, but they could if they chose to do so. Oklahoma statutes Title 11, Section 45 and following addresses the appointment, composition, duties, and powers of the Municipal Planning Commission for those municipalities under 200,000, which certainly puts that in the Yukon category. Section 201:30 of the Municipal Code states that in conducting its work, the Planning Commission may consider and investigate any subject matter tending to the development and betterment of the city, which I would suggest is exactly what you've done here tonight. So kudos to you all for taking your extra time to look at an issue that you wanted to dive into. The Planning Commission may also cause to be made surveys, studies, maps, and plans in the conduct of its activities. So if in the course of tonight's discussion you said, well, we'd like to know an overview, a map that shows all the R2 zones within the city or something much more specific than that, then you could direct staff to prepare that for you. So you do have that ability as well. It's also important to remember that as a public body formed under the state of Oklahoma, you are subject to the Oklahoma Open Meetings Act. That requires that all meetings of the public bodies be held at specified times and places which are convenient to the public, and that such meetings be preceded by advance public notice specifying the date, time, and place of such meeting, as well as the subject matter. That's why tonight's study session, even though there's no action required, had to be posted as a meeting, because there's more than 3 of you present here. There are 3 or more of you present here. So we had to tell the public what we were talking about, but we did advise them there would be no action taken. So public body is defined as meaning the government bodies of all municipalities located in the state of Oklahoma, and again includes subcommittees or committees of that public body. Now here's the one that's a little bit of a sticking point. Meeting means the conducting of business by a public body by a majority of its members being personally together or together pursuant to a teleconference or pursuant together through email communications. I'm always very careful when I communicate with the council. I don't have occasion to communicate with you, this board, very often by email, but by the council, I never send an email out to all 5 of them so that they could then respond to me. Because if I do that, then we're conducting business. We're talking about the affairs of the city. So I'll send the same email out individually to each of them. Then they can give me direction or talk to me, but they're not conferring with each other. And so that's something we really want to avoid. So, the code says 3 members of the Planning Commission constitute a quorum, and no action is binding on the commission unless concurred by a majority of all the Planning Commission members. So it takes a minimum vote of 3. So what we want to avoid in that instance is the appearance that that 3 of you are conducting business at the city. I know it's very much human nature to leave this meeting when you're fired up about the topic, go out to the parking lot and rehash what you talked about. I've been in that position. I've been in municipal government, representing governments for almost 25 years. So I know that feeling, but we really want to avoid that because you are once you gather with two other your members and start talking about this rezoning and the applications and the overlay district, then you're really conducting business without giving the agenda and letting the public know. So that's something you want to be careful of, just to kind of an overview and a warning that could occur. So a member of the public body may also not lawfully meet separately with other members to obtain majorities or to poll the members. There are several cases in Oklahoma statutes where that has occurred, where a member of a public body might call each one of you separately and tell you what his thoughts are, his or her thoughts, and then try to poll you so he'd know if he had the votes to do something. Technically, that's not allowed either, because you're circumventing the Open Meetings Act. You're conducting the business of the public without the public being there to hear it.
So on that point, it's best to just say no comment. Is that what you're?
I would recommend that.
Right.
I would.
Okay.
Yeah. So I've said you can't meet together. Informal gatherings among a majority of the members of a public body to decide on a course of action or vote on any matter are prohibited. So if three of you decided, hey, let's go grab a cup of coffee or a beer or whatever and talk about, some things we'd like to see in the code, you really can't do that. Your forum to do that would be precisely like what you did tonight. I love to see that exchange. Oftentimes these meetings tend to be kind of scripted, but tonight you had the idea to have an exchange of ideas without taking action and to dive deeper into what your role is. And I think which is precisely what the code calls for and what the statute calls for. It's important to remember that any willful violation, intentional or unintentional, of the Open Meetings Act could subject the public body to criminal sanctions. So over the course of my practice, I've had a few instances where a claim has been made that has occurred. No one's been punished for that yet, but that the law says they can be. Again, study sessions and workshops like you had tonight are generally considered meetings under the Oklahoma Meetings Act. The majority of the governing body are present. So it applies even if an item of business is discussed but no action or vote is taken, which is exactly why we had to post this as a meeting and why you went ahead and took roll call, because in the future, if we're determining how many meetings you've been present at or absent from, this counts as a meeting, even though it's a special meeting and no action was taken. It is a meeting of the public body. The statutes and the case law say specifically that discussion of an item of business is part of the decision-making process and amounts to conducting business of a public body. So if you're meeting in the parking lot and talking about the overlay district, even though you're not taking a vote out there, you're discussing it, and that's the public business. So that's what we want to shy away from. When I first came on board here for the city council, they had a pretty broad understanding of the couple of topics on their agenda, one of which was reports or communications from the council members. And on occasion, we might have been drifting a little bit into conducting business, because if under report, if there then began to be an exchange between various members, it came close to being an unscripted or not advertised business of the public, because there was no agenda item about it. So we really have to stick to what's on the agenda. I haven't had to do it with you guys, and frankly, I don't have to do it with the council very often at all either. But on occasion, I have said, ladies and gentlemen, you're veering off the agenda. You need to get back on that, because the public, maybe there's one member of the public that's very concerned about urban overlay, and he didn't know that was going to be on the agenda. If you start talking about it, then that's a violation of the Open Meetings Act, if he didn't have notice of it. People ask me often about social functions. All five of you can attend the Chamber of Commerce banquet. You can attend functions, do things together. It's just best not to probably all sit at the same table. That's what I've recommended, or to travel together in a group of 3 or more. This may seem like overkill, but you really want to avoid the appearance of impropriety, that you're not opening the opportunity for you all to discuss the urban overlay district or some other item without the public being there. So 2 of you traveling together is fine. 3 or more, anytime there's a quorum or more, that creates an issue or an appearance that there could be.
What
an
about
issue.
Fantasy football league?
You could talk about fantasy
Okay.
football anytime you want. Yeah. As long as you're the Kansas City Chiefs.
I'm not riding with you.
Really more so just the appearance of it, right?
Right. That's exactly. This pre-meeting or study session was kind of a new avenue for me. I was previously with the city of El Reno. We didn't do those. On occasion, we did study sessions, but we didn't do routinely like the city of Yukon does. But every time Yukon does it, they post that as a meeting. So under those guidelines, it's fine. And they're held in a public meeting where there's room for the public to come. I would not be in favor of a study session or a pre-meeting being held off-site at a remote location that's not easily accessible. I also had a council one time who wanted to schedule a meeting at 7 in the morning. I strongly suggest they not do that, because that's not a convenient time for the general public. That's what all your meetings have to be. You really don't go into executive session, so that's not too applicable to your session. Agendas for public meetings of public bodies have to be posted at least 24 hours prior to the meeting, while special meetings other than those regularly scheduled may be called at least 48 hours by at least 48 hours notice. Now, the regular meetings are posted with the city clerk and with the state. Who is it at the state? You know, we have to post that with the Secretary of State, I think. So those are on the books well in advance. But special meetings can be called. They just have to have 48 hours notice to be called, and you have to have 24 hours notice before the agenda is posted. So if you decided that you wanted to take action on one of the things you talked about tonight and wanted that on the agenda, you'd have to give Danielle at least 24 hours notice before a regular meeting.
I have a wild question for you. So
Sure.
if we saw an agenda for the next planning commission meeting and we saw something that, for example, maybe Jeff's like, hey, I want to have a study session on this first. Do we do that before? Do we need to meet? You know what I mean? Like like getting ahead of it, I guess.
Well,
Like,
no,
can we
you-
do that?
You could do that, but it would depend on the timing, because you have to have at least 48 hours notice.
But within your guidelines.
Yeah,
too,
yeah, within
right?
the guidelines, you could sure do that.
I mean, so
Yeah.
like a lot of times we'll get our packet a week in advance, and if
yeah.
we like review it, and then and again, like I think we should meet before and talk through some things. Like that's possible.
Right. Well, using this urban core overlay as an example, when you saw that on the agenda last time, if you had a week's notice beforehand, you could have contacted staff and said, hey, can we have a study session before our meeting on back in July? So could we have a study session then to go over that before we actually have an item brought before us related to it?
So-
And there would have been enough time. to
So if
post
I
that.
wanted that, I needed to contact him, and then Jared would then request that, or how's that?
I don't exactly know the
Just to be
protocol
clear.
on that. We don't have many special meetings of the commission.
Well, I don't know what Steven's point is, but I would think it's in the spirit of saving time for some of our folks coming in here. You know what I mean?
Well, we can actually do this two ways. The commission members one-on-one can come and meet with staff. We can do
Okay.
that. But if there's something that you believe that needs to be discussed, or you need more in-depth as a group, like we did the study session, we can do that as well. And that's the vehicle that the
As
city
long as
attorney is
it's
recommending.
48 hours in advance, we can post it, and then
Yeah.
and of course staff be able to put together what we
Yes.
need. For it. So
Yes, or after this meeting, we're going to discuss something. You can say, hey, I'd like to have a study session on, what come out of the meeting or something like that, or something we bring to you, discuss.
It may just prolong the action at that, or the action item that's
It
required.
may, but at the same time, when we're talking about, changes in the ordinance, sometimes taking your time to review it, because the implications and impact, every action has a reaction. It may be good or may be bad. But when we get talking about, preliminary plats and final plats, those are kind of, already in play, because the zoning is already there, the base zoning.
Which I will say, I've had to call Mitch and them before anybody that ever needs to do this. I've called them before and bugged them, and they're great at putting up with me, just for questions I
It's not
have.
bugging.
Steven did the same. Yeah.
I personally went down
Yeah.
and sat down just for some clarification and the legal jargon. And thank you and your team
Yeah.
for doing that. It really helped for me to be prepared today.
Two items I might talk to you about just briefly on the agenda that you normally get. One is new business, and the other is open discussion. I briefly addressed that in my paper here, that the municipal league discourages the use of new business, because by its very nature, if it's new business, then you haven't posted an agenda out, so the public can't come in. So I'm not really sure why public bodies continue to put that on there. Maybe that's done it under parliamentary procedure rules, but I've rarely, if ever, seen new business and an action item taken. If there's an emergency, there's a way that councils can take emergency action without on the agenda, but it has to be like the tornado wiped out your school and you're trying to restore power and water to the nursing home, or something really extreme like that, in my opinion.
The
So-
only recollection I have of new business in the few years that I've done this, somebody was getting ahead of 5G, and they're like, "I just want you to know what I feel about cell phone 5G, just so it was in our heads." You know, we couldn't speak to nothing. We're like, "Thank you," and then eventually it came in front of us. You know, and then she was back to talk about it. So
The other item, there's open discussion. I think generally your body uses that to give kudos to public employees or talk about something that's going on in the city. That's fine. But you couldn't, under open discussion, say, well, I'd like to talk about what's going on with the R3 zoning and, you know, why we have the setbacks are so substantial, and then start talking about it. Because again, you haven't given the public notice that you're going to be doing that. So that's the thing. I think generally, from my experience with you guys, you do a great job of sticking to the agenda and staying on board. And I don't see any open meetings Act issues. But I just we wanted to make sure that everyone understood you are a public body and you are subject to that rule.
well, I appreciate that. And I think we would all agree that we want to do things the right way.
Sure.
And thank you for putting all that
You're
together
welcome.
and speaking to us. And
And
we got a few.
each of you are welcome to call me if you ever have any questions about anything.
I'm used to bugging you, so thank you, staff, for putting together all this information for us. I thought this was extremely beneficial, and it made me feel good about the decision I was making. But we'll just adjourn for a few minutes, and then we'll reconvene for the planning commission meeting.